We got Mr. Ballen on this Mr. Ballen Sunday, man. Make sure I give you a thumbs up, man. I'm finna go ahead and get into it. Kind of long video. I did say I ain't doing no 20-minute plus video. I did say that, bro. I ain't gonna lie to you. But I'm ready to watch Tussle King. If y'all don't know, y'all didn't go watch Tussle King. You know what I'm saying? New season 9. I'm finna go watch that. Nigga, and my mom just cooked some fried ribs, nigga. I'm finna go fuck that shit. Let's go ahead and get into it, though, bro.
2011, a 32-year-old seafood vendor named Carla Flores stood in the entryway of her home, balancing a tray of shrimp in one hand and waving goodbye to her 3 kids with the other. She told her kids she'd be right back, and then she stepped out the front door onto the streets of Culiacan, which is a major city in northwestern Mexico. Carla was going to deliver this tray of shrimp to one of her regular customers. She walked down an alleyway and then onto a main road, and then eventually into a neighborhood with a whole bunch of brightly colored houses. She went up to one of them and knocked on the door.
That should look nice.
A man answered, and Carla handed him the tray of shrimp. He took the shrimp, gave her a handful of cash. She thanked him and turned and headed back down towards the street. And Carla had made it all the way back to the alleyway right near her house when suddenly she heard this loud sound, and then before she could figure out what it was, this small, hard object smashed into her right cheek, and it hit her so hard she fell onto the pavement.
A bullet?
And so instinctively, Carla reached up and she touched her cheek, and she felt a warm, wet liquid. She looked at her hand, and it was covered in blood. Carla tried to get up, but her ears were ringing, and she felt dizzy. And suddenly, everything went black.
She got shot.
20 minutes later, a receptionist at Culiacan General Hospital watched as a man carried a bloody, unconscious woman into the emergency room. He laid her down on a bench in the waiting area, and then he just turned around and began walking back out again. The receptionist jumped up and chased after this guy, demanding to know what was going on with this woman. Who is she? What happened to her? What are you doing? But the guy just said, look, I was driving down the road and I saw this woman bloody in the streets, and so I brought her here. I promise you, that's all I know. And then he turned and kept on walking. Receptionist went back inside to check on the woman.
That's weird.
The receptionist looked down at the woman. She was unconscious, her mouth was hanging open, and the entire right side of her face was totally mangled. And then embedded in this mess on the right side of her cheek, basically in her head, was this weird dark-colored object, but she couldn't tell what it was, and she didn't have time to stand around trying to find out. So she called for help, and a couple of nurses came running out of the emergency room, and together they lifted this woman up, put her on a gurney, wheeled her back to see a doctor. A few moments later, Dr. Gustavo Mesa walked into Carla's hospital room. He'd been briefed on her condition, but when he went inside, she was no longer unconscious. Now her eyes were wide open, and she looked totally confused. Dr. Mesa could tell Carla was having trouble breathing, and she couldn't close her mouth. But then Carla began making this grunting sound. And at first, the doctor couldn't understand what she was saying, but then it became clear she was saying, rock, rock, rock. Dr. Mesa's first thought was, oh, she's telling me she was hit by a rock. That's what's caused her injury. And so Dr. Mesa leaned in and looked at her wound, and he caught a glimpse of what looked like a dark-colored stone buried inside of her cheek. Dr. Mesa thought, wow, she must have been hit so hard by this rock, this stone, for it to get buried that far inside of her face. He promised Carla he would get it out, but first he told her she would have to undergo an x-ray to really figure out where it was in her skull and how exactly they'd be able to get it out. A few minutes later, Dr. Mesa stood in the radiology department looking over Carla's x-ray images, and it was immediately clear to him and all the other medical staff that what was in Carla's cheek was not a rock, because the object was shaped like an oval, it had round edges, and it was perfectly symmetrical. To Dr. Mesa, it just seemed far too uniform to be a rock. But he didn't have a better guess for what it was. All he could tell from the x-ray was this object had broken Carla's upper and lower jaw and shattered several of her teeth. And now this object was
I don't know what it is now. I thought it was
problems. Dr. Mesa knew it was going to take surgery to get this thing out, but he needed more information before he felt confident operating. So he ordered a CAT scan of Carla's head to give him a more detailed picture of this object. And when the results came in and Dr. Mesa looked at the image, his face went pale. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. But the proof was right there in front of him. He knew he would have to do something, and fast. So Dr. Mesa ran to the nearest nurse's station and told the nurse to evacuate everybody from the emergency room.
Oh shit.
Then he grabbed the hospital phone and he dialed a military official. Less than an hour later, Carla was no longer in the hospital. She was now out in the middle of a grassy field, laying on her back, absolutely terrified. An anesthesiologist walked up to her and injected a local anesthetic into her cheek. And suddenly, the agonizing pain that Carla had felt ever since waking up in the hospital was now gone. But her absolute terror was not. Carla knew there were two doctors and a nurse standing by to perform an operation on her, but also there were two army soldiers just a few feet away from her,
what the fuck?
staring at her. Carla saw a doctor start to bring a scalpel toward her face, and she had to close her eyes to keep from flinching. She heard the soldiers giving directions.
Hey, cuz, I ain't gonna lie. Nigga, if I see all that, and I see some soldiers coming in, and y'all gotta hit, look, passing the fuck out, bro. I ain't gonna lie. What y'all think it is? Because I don't know what it is at this point. I thought it was a bullet.
Of surgical instruments. And
I thought it
all
was
the
a
while,
bullet.
Carla kept her eyes shut tight and just tried to pretend none of this was even happening. And after what felt like a lifetime, Carla felt a shift inside of her face. And it was the doctors and nurses pulling this object out of her cheek. Carla opened her eyes, and right above her head, she saw the doctor holding the bloody thing they had just removed from her face. It was a live grenade. That's why she was being operated on, not in the hospital, but out in this open field. Because if it
a grenade, nigga,
operation, it would at least limit casualties. And that's also why the military was called in to tell the medical staff how to handle this live piece of ordnance in the middle of the operation. After the grenade was safely removed from Carla's face, it was disposed of by the army soldiers. It's believed that the grenade that hit Carla was fired out of a grenade launcher. That would explain the loud sound she heard in the alleyway before it hit her in the face. Luckily, though, the grenade's fuse that should have ignited and caused it to explode didn't work. So even though it absolutely was a live grenade, it didn't explode, and so it didn't kill her. It's unknown who shot the grenade, why they shot it, or whether Carla was the intended target or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Carla would ultimately lose half her teeth, she would undergo multiple reconstructive surgeries, and she would be left with a huge scar on her right cheek. But she said she was just happy to be alive. And she was forever grateful to the stranger who brought her to the hospital.
I know I ain't going.
And the army soldiers who risked their lives to save her.
I know I ain't going.
If you don't know this, late last year, we launched a brand new, strange, dark, and mysterious show called Mr. Ballen's Medical Mysteries. And so far, people love it. It is a free weekly...
Ain't no way you telling me, cuz. No way you was telling me.
And 4 pictures.
Oh, wow.
Look this up. This is the new product here that they've came out with. It is...
Hold on, y'all.
All right. Multiple types of... Cradling her 6-week-old baby girl named Claire. Claire was her first...
Alright, now what y'all think about that first story? Because ain't no way. How the fuck that even happened? I never heard of no shit like that. I know what not to go now. I ain't think it was a rocket, my name. Everything? A grenade is crazy, cuz. Like, how did it not go off? I think God was on her side, if you ask me. You ask me, God was on her side. For real.
An only child. And like a lot of first-time parents, the mother was very paranoid about her daughter's health. And so anytime there was a change in her behavior or her appearance changed, it was like this mom rushed to the doctor. And that morning, the mother had noticed something very unusual on her daughter's head. There were 2 raised white lines that made the shape of a plus sign. There was one line that ran from the nape of her neck all the way in back, all the way up her head to her forehead, and the other line was horizontal, and it went from behind one ear all the way to the other ear. Now, this mother had no idea what these lines were, what they meant, what caused them, and so as soon as she saw them, she scooped her kid up and she headed to the hospital. Now, in the past, every time this mother had brought Claire to the hospital, the visit always ended with, "Your child is just fine." But this time, when the receptionist saw Claire's head and saw those lines...
That's what they all say. Make sure y'all get a second opinion, third opinion on your kids. When it comes to them babies, you got to make sure they straight. They can't talk. No cap.
She immediately said, "Those do not look normal." And so she handed the mother some paperwork and told her they would get Claire to a neurologist as soon as they could. 15 minutes later, the mother stood in an exam room and watched as the hospital's pediatric neurologist, Dr. Farhad Afshar, examined Claire's head. And after a moment, Dr. Afshar stepped back and he explained to the mother that these raised lines on her daughter's head were something known as bulging fontanelles. So when a baby is born, the bones of their skull are not actually fused together yet. And the thin gaps between these separate skull bones are called fontanelles. And Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that when a baby's fontanelles begin to bulge like this, it's usually because the child's brain is so swollen that it's beginning to push the skull bones apart. Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that she had made the right decision to bring her daughter to the hospital. But he was clear that a lot of things can cause a baby's brain to swell and potentially cause these bulging fontanelles. And so in order to figure out what was going on, they would need to order a CAT scan. Claire's mom felt uneasy, but she said okay. And so they did the CT scan, and then a few minutes later, Dr. Afshar came back into the room with the results. With a grave expression on his face, he told Claire's mother that he had some terrible news. Her daughter had a brain tumor. Hearing this, Claire's mom felt like the entire world was crumbling all around her. She was terrified for her daughter, and she had a million questions. But before she could ask any of them, Dr. Afshar said, there's something else. He said that normally brain tumors are made up of brain cells. But based on the CT scan, it looked like Claire's tumor inside of her brain was made partially of fat and partially of bone. Dr. Afshar said he had never seen anything like this and couldn't even begin to explain.
That don't even make sense.
But the one thing he did know is that whatever this thing was, it had to come out of Claire. Leaving it inside of her head could at a minimum cause serious neurological damage, or at worst could even kill the child. So Dr. Afshar told Claire's mom that she only had really one option. Claire needed brain surgery. Even though the operation was very risky for a child as young as Claire was, it was the only way they could figure out what this mass actually was, and it was the only way to get it out. Soon after their conversation, Dr. Afshar was sitting in the operating room with Claire sedated, laying face down on the table in front of him. Dr. Afshar made an incision across the back of Claire's head. Then he cut a rectangle into her skull, essentially creating a small door. He opened up that door to see the bottom of Claire's brain. He delicately moved the left and right hemispheres of Claire's brain slightly apart so he could reach the section where the tumor was. And that's when he got his first glimpse of this strange mass. He grabbed it with a pair of surgical tongs and gently tugged. And he was surprised at how easily it began to slide out. And slowly it came into the light. And when Dr. Afshar finally got a full look at what this thing was, he was so stunned he just froze, staring at this thing that seemed impossible. And so after setting this strange mass aside, Dr. Afshar closed her skull, stitched her head up, and then sent her to the pediatric ICU. Claire laid unconscious in a hospital bed with her mother by her side for weeks. Meanwhile, Dr. Afshar ordered a genetic test on the mass he had removed from Claire's brain. And it turned out Claire was not an only child like her mother thought. She was actually a twin. And the mass that Dr. Afshar had removed from Claire's brain was her twin sibling's fetus. Claire had an extreme condition called fetus in fetu. Fetus in fetu occurs in the very early stages of a twin pregnancy, when cells don't divide properly and one fetus becomes enveloped by the other. The enveloping twin looks like a single baby, but they're actually born with their siblings' partially developed fetus still inside of their body. The fetus in Claire's head was 5.5 inches long. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, but its head hadn't formed yet. And Claire's case was extra rare because her twin's fetus was found inside of her skull. In all of global medical history, intracranial fetus in fetu had only ever been recorded 18 other times. And it was thought to be a fatal diagnosis because to this point, all the others who had it had died. But after 2 weeks in the ICU, Claire woke up. And a week after that, she was healthy enough to go back home. And by 18 months old, she had fully recovered and had no lingering neurological problems. As far as the medical literature suggests, Claire was the first person to ever survive having her own twin removed from her brain.
Crazy as fuck. That's it. A bonus star, nigga? Oh shit! Excuse the fuck out of me! I was gonna cut this bitch off.
In July of 18...
I'm gonna cut this bitch off, y'all.
Phineas Gage, got a job working construction on the Hudson River Railroad in New York. At this time in America, railroads were being laid all over the country, so lots of workers like Phineas were needed to blast rock out of the way to lay down these railroad tracks. And as it happened, Phineas was an expert in explosives. He had learned how to set controlled blasts growing up on his family's farm in New Hampshire, and then later in his life, he had worked in a mine blasting through rock. And so, in addition to just being an ideal railroad worker for this time in America, I don't want to turn it off right now. Hold on. Working in New York on this railroad, his co-workers immediately started looking up to him. Phineas was extremely smart and energetic. He was this incredible conversationalist. He was charismatic and funny and a natural leader. And so just 2 months into starting this new job, it was no surprise to anyone who knew Phineas or worked with Phineas that he was promoted to blasting foreman, which meant Phineas would lead the explosives team. Phineas was so excited about this promotion that he went to a blacksmith and had a custom tamping iron made. A tamping iron is a long metal rod that's used to... I just want to make sure, you feel me? I just want to make sure, you feel me? We already... Make sure y'all go... It's somewhere in the playlist. Y'all go... You know what I'm saying? Make sure y'all go watch that. We already seen that video, the last video. So make sure y'all give the video a thumbs up, like, subscribe. Happy Sunday. Y'all be blessed. See y'all Wednesday. That's right, man.